aspect, I guess.
Have you ever told anybody your story about the cube? Have you ever shared that
Uh,
on
I
podcast at
did.
all?
I told Tom Martell, but the thing is, I didn't know. Like, I obviously would be flattered if I was credited with it. And I remember holding these like three big boxes around in the World Series. I'm like, let's draft, and like David Williams was there, Casey McCarroll was there, blah blah. Blah. But like, I don't know. I'd be very glad and grateful to be credited with,
I mean,
pioneering the game.
whenever I've told the story of the cube, because I mean, it's part of the Magic lexicon at this point. Magic Online has a series of cubes that they roll out at any given time. There's always a cube that's one of the primary chief draft formats. And it's so funny because, like, the origin story of the deck, I think almost nobody even knows why it's called the cube at all. The story that I've told people is that the initial box that you guys had the
Three.
cards for your initial draft set in, it was three. It
Yeah.
wasn't always three though. I imagine
Okay,
you
yeah,
kept.
yeah, yeah. It started as one and then two, and then it got to the point where there are just too many individual cards.
Yeah.
So I can tell the story from my point of view. So when I
You
was
should.
at
I mean,
UC,
obviously, you do it far more justice than I would, and it's important for me to hear it too because I will continue to relay it.
oh yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you're relaying, and I would be glad to get credit for this. In UCSD, and I told this to John Sasso too, a supersize. Like, I'm gonna make a draft set with one of every individual card, and I brought it to, I started doing it. Of course, I'm missing a lot of the expensive cards, but when people play it, they're like, oh my God, this is so fun because you already know there's no duplicates. And then there's so many tough decisions like bombs in certain sets in certain eras. Like, how do they compare? Like,
Right. Totally.
for example, Curse Scroll. Curse Scroll is not very good in Cube.
Such a great example. That no, that's I think that's literally the best example of what of this idea that you're talking about. But go on.
So, like in Tempest, if you open Curse Scroll, boom, you don't even look at the rest of the pack.
Definitely not. And then you
You
just
look at the rest of yeah, you look at the
get
rest of the
ready
pack
for
just
your
to know
three
what's
wins.
out there. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, but then in Cube, you have stuff like Curse Scroll, Land Tax. Like, I'm trying to think of some like
How about
Morphling.
yeah,
You
or an
you
X
just
spell,
yeah, or an X spell. And X
or
spells
fireball.
are
Fireball. Yeah.
what's amazing about the X spells, at least in the version that I have, is that they are very good, but they aren't necessarily first picks. There's a lot of bombs that are just like straight up better.
Totally.
Something like the blue black Demir Guildmage, is that what it's called?
Yeah. Dimir
That
Gilmate.
guy that guy is nuts.
Yeah,
Like
he's not
he's like not necessarily a bomb, but there's no like super bomb, he's like one of the top guys for sure.
totally. Absolutely. It's just a card that can completely snowball into a win all by
And
itself. It's a two drop. It's a 2/2 for two. So it's just
and,
solid in that regard.
and he's a tribute to the deck, James Day Tillman, Disrupting Scepter in one card.
DMD Tellman Scepter in one card. Yeah, both at
So
source. Yeah.
yeah, I made the cube, and it was like one, and that's why it's called the cube, because it's in those big ass boxes. And then I
Was
had
it
in Sandy.
actually in a was it technically in a rectangular box though? Like
Yeah,
a
it's
long box?
yeah, rectangular box,
That's
but
an important part of the story because it's not literally a cube. I've always
yeah.
said like you actually happen to just have this box that was a literal cube, and so all the cards fit nicely in there. And
Oh no, it was those big
this is
ass.
my own imagination.
I'm glad to, whatever. It's like, I thought it was so awesome because, as you know, I have the most fun drafting. My performance shows that I'm better in constructed, but just drafting, so has a feel that is just like unmatched in constructed. So we have this cube, or I created this cube. I have one, and then in UC San Diego, I have a buddy, Chris Chang, who's a PhD student, and then David Fisher and like Andy Wang. So we would draft this like throughout the night, and it was like,
Yeah.
I remember back when we were at match play, we would draft, and then at some point you're the responsible one. You're like, I got to go home, but that would last until like 2-3 a.m.
Not very responsible, I assure you. But yeah, until well, normally we would leave that place and then go to Denny's and then play.
So
Denny's is 24 hours. So
yeah, and Lions. But
yeah, Lions. That's right. The
with
low rent.
the cube, we were so degen, and I haven't played like 24 hours slash more than 24 hours in the game for like a really long time. But then when we had that, we actually did for like we actually drafted over 24 hours.
Wow.
So then one World Series of Poker came, and everybody was in the degen poker mode, and I just wanted to cube draft. So I brought that thing over, and in the one house, Euban, David Williams, Casey McCarroll, and a couple other Magic players, and we drafted it, and they were like, "Oh my god, this is awesome!" But money beats Magic at that mid-20s age. So
Yeah, of
even though
course.
they were really excited about it, that they went off. But I just kept building and building it until it was 3 boxes, and then I have real life responsibilities, so I ended up just like not continuing. So I don't know what happened, but at some point it actually became a thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when it actually started to propagate virally, beyond just hearing about it as something that you did. Because you would write to me periodically. I don't remember what avenue you were communicating with me in. I remember having conversations with you when I was living in Santa Barbara, and I lived in Santa Barbara between 2003 and 2007. So I remember you writing to me and asking me questions, like, for example, just asking me which card do you think is the best card, period, in the cube, based on the card set. What card's going to be most consistently insane? And I think that our agreement was, it might have, well, I mean, obviously outside, you had power in it though. You had Ancestral Recall and stuff, right?
I did, but it got to a point where they come up so infrequently
Yeah,
that
once you dilute it so much, it becomes less of a factor. But I remember Mana Drain, and during the conversation, apropos what we
yeah,
were talking about before, and the card Treachery, for example, being another just absolutely top five windmill slam it 100% of the time. Like, you'd take Treachery over Black Lotus a lot of the time. And and actually, what's interesting is that I have my own cube that I've been working on and developing for more than a decade. Actually, it's gone through a million iterations and probably has no more than 20% of the cards in there were cards that it had when I first built it. Um, but seeing the sort of steady evolution and coming to understand, I've kind of touched on so many things in the creation of this cube. The big defining thing though that separates the cube that you guys played from the cube that most people who have heard of the term in modern day, is that when you guys drafted your cube, you would always be dealing with you'd be drafting a very small subset of a larger card pool every time.
yes,
Like, you do a draft with 4 people, your card pool is 1,200 cards. 4 people is only, what is that? It's only 12 packs, right? So 12 packs times 15, you're dealing with whatever, like 160 cards. It's a tiny cross section of a much bigger chunk of stuff.
yeah,
As a result of that, it's much harder to go after particular archetypes, because in that
absolutely,
small subsection of the cube, an entire archetype might not be even supported. So, like, for example, you open a pack and you go, damn, I really love mono red. I want to draft Jackal Pup. So you draft Jackal Pup first. But then, just by pure coincidence, all the other good aggro creatures are in the other parts of the cube. And you wind up with a mono red deck where you have 1/1 drop, and then all your other things are threes, because there were
yep,
just no drops, right? You could not draft mono red, and you got screwed because you picked mono red to go with. Your first two, you took Jackal Pup, then you took a Lightning Bolt, and you're like, okay, well, I'll just take this 3 mana thing, and I guess I'll take this 4 mana thing, and shit, there's no good red cards, I'll take a green card, and you're stuck in red. Before you know it, you have the worst deck in the world. And so
yep,
this is something that I kind of recognized in my own cube, because the cubes that you and I are drafting, unlike the cubes that are drafted on Magic Online. And Magic Online, every card in the cube is in the pool every time you draft, 100% of the time. I believe that that's correct. I'm not 100% sure, but if you look at the list, because they publish the contents of every cube, if you look at the list, the list is 8 players, so it's 24 packs times 15, and that is the cube. That's the same. You're dealing with the same set of cards every single time, which obviously rewards foresight and preparation. But more importantly, if you draft a specific archetype, you always know that the archetype is going to be in
exists,
play.
yeah,
There's always going to be a Storm deck. There's always going to be a Splinter Twin Kiki-Jiki deck. There's always going to be a mono red deck. All the pieces are there every single time. So you can draft knowing that, with that foresight, and count on being able to get that deck consistently, provided that you're able to pick up the key pieces for it. You can look for it. You always know that there's going to be one of every dual land. And so you can play around that. So if you draft a fetch land, like if you prioritize drafting a fetch land, you know that there's going to be multiple dual lands that intersect with that fetch land in the pool at that moment, and it's guaranteed. And that's so huge in terms of how you can go about constructing your cube, because you can actually put real archetypes into it. So I would say that for people out there listening to this podcast who want to build their own cubes, and you should give Wayne full credit for the concept, you need to decide if you're going to have always be drafting your cube with 8 players or 4 players or whatever, and you need to make your card, you need to adjust your card pool accordingly. Because what will actually happen is if you make a broader subset of cards, like let's say, in my case, I think my cube is around 600 cards usually. So it's enough to make around 36 to 38 packs total. And we're only drafting a small subset of that. What actually happens over time is that you'll see time and time and time again that savvy players will ignore all the fast stuff. They ignore all the beatdown creatures. They'll go like 14th and 15th pick because beatdown is not a consistent strategy. It's one of those cards that, one of those deck archetypes that requires a critical mass of mana development, right? You need a mana curve. You need to make a real proper aggressive deck, you need like 4 or 5 1-drops. And then you need 7 or 8 2-drops. And then a few 3s, maybe a couple of 4s, and then some removal and land, and that's your deck. You're never ever going to consistently get that when you're dealing with 1,200 cards and you're only looking at a small subsection of that. It just won't work. So what happens is that reinforces the behavior where people will go and they'll draft and they'll just ignore the Savannah Lands. They'll just never take Savannah Lands because they know that it's a trap. And gradually over time, what happens is, since I'm constantly editing the deck based on the data, what cards are going 14th and 15th pick consistently? Well, I'm like, well, shit, nobody's drafted Jackal Pup the last 9 drafts. It's gone 15th pick. And they pull it out. Or I'm sorry, so I pull the card out of the pool. And then I do that for lots of the other 1-drops, basically the aggro creature 1-drops. And before you know it, steadily evolving over time, the entire cube just shifts into this sort of weird mid-range, late-game bomby strategy. And there's no opportunity to play beatdown at all because all the beatdown creatures have been taken out. So you have to be very careful when you're constructing it. What really fundamentally matters as far as how you go about constructing your cube is how many people do you intend to be drafting this with in any given thing. And if you're going to be, if like half or more of the cards are in play in every draft that you do and that's guaranteed, then you can actually put archetypes in. Otherwise, don't even bother. Just put in lots of good stuff and just accept the fact that it's going to be mid-range.
I enjoyed the fact that there were no archetypes because even in that, like you said, there's less beatdown. So when you do go beatdown, like you start picking up stupid things, like even 2/2s for 3, like morph creatures increase in value, like hill giants are, like, and those end up being fast enough in those environments to it's a beatdown, especially if everyone's curve is going higher up. But it's a different era, so like I'm just glad it caught on because I thought it was so fun just comparing bombs with bombs and just like how certain bombs in certain formats, when you completely blast out the environment, how they just like completely devalue.
Yeah, I mean, think of cards like original bombs like Shivan and Sarah Angel, completely overshadowed by modern design. And that's obviously that's a quality of Magic power creep in general. I mean, Magic power creep has gotten, particularly with regards to Planeswalkers. I think Planeswalkers as a class of cards have just completely shifted everything about the game so fundamentally. And not only are Planeswalkers insanely powerful, but they've been really, really pushing Planeswalkers as a thing too, because Planeswalkers are sexy and they sell sets, they sell packs. There's an insane Planeswalker at 3 mana. People will buy packs to get that Planeswalker because it's super exciting to have it. The problem is that